So I just saw Gemini Man, and it was... Who could have seen this coming? As soon as I saw the trailer for Will Smith versus Will Smith, I knew it was gonna be pretty funny. Weirdly enough, this was originally supposed to be a Disney movie directed by Tony Scott in 1997, but at the time they decided that the technology just wasn't there yet to make a CG younger version of the same actor. So now finally, thanks to Ang Lee directing it, we get it in 2019. Not sure why the younger version being computer generated was so necessary for the plot, though. I didn't have any trouble believing that Joseph Gordon-Levitt was a younger Bruce Willis in Looper. All they did was throw on a few makeup prosthetics to help match his face better. It's not really necessary at all, but I guess it looked cool for most of the movie. That is, up until we get the one shot showing him where it's not really dark. It's still pretty impressive, but it wasn't nearly as convincing when he was properly lit. It's unfortunately a huge trend right now with movies featuring a lot of computer animation. If you make everything really dark, then the imperfections in the textures won't be as noticeable. It's exactly why every current Disney remake is annoyingly dark. Yay! Ang Lee is now heavily associated with giant leaps forward in terms of computer technology. Life of Pi had pretty groundbreaking visuals and animation, but unfortunately, because of how Hollywood treats animation studios, they actually went bankrupt before they could even collect their Oscar. And just as they were about to mention the financial hardships their company was going through, they cut off their fucking mic.
Sadly, Rhythm and Hughes is suffering severe financial difficulties right now. I urge you all to remember.
Stay classy, Academy. There's a really good documentary on YouTube called Life After Pi that you should probably check out. Animators are constantly treated like garbage, so it's best if people are at least more aware of it. Anyway, the animation in this movie was pretty cool for the most part at the expense of the movie just being really dark. The vocal performance from Will Smith was also pretty convincing. Not sure how much of it was edited, but it really felt like his younger self. Unfortunately, even with the cool effects, this movie still kinda looked bad. It's really not good to release an action movie where half the time you can't even tell what's going on. And even when I could tell what was going on, a lot of the time it just felt very silly. The shot where Will Smith dodged the motorbike was hilarious. A lot of the action in this movie just felt really poorly presented, and I'm not sure if the super high frame rate made it better or worse. For some reason, Ang Lee decided that he wanted to make two technological leaps in the same movie. Apparently, the intended format for watching this film is 3D 4K at 120 frames per second, and the vast majority of theaters are not capable of playing that. Some would do 2K 120 or 4K 60, and obviously there were a bunch of regular 24 frames per second showings too. Obviously, I went to a high frame rate showing because I wanted to see this movie in the dankest way possible. I had already seen the new Hobbit movies in 48 frames per second, so I already had an idea of what it might be like. In my experience watching those films, it felt a little weird. Part of me wondered if the uncinematic qualities to these high frame rate showings were just because we're not used to them yet, and after watching Gemini Man, I still have no idea. All I know is that it was very distracting and did not really help the experience of the movie. Not as if that really matters with this story, though. This movie had plenty of time to communicate everything it needed to, but it failed pretty hard. I'm still not completely sure why Clive Owen was mad at Will Smith to begin with. The way this film handled character growth was really flimsy. I shit you not, there's a scene that ends with Will Smith shouting, "I'm not you!" And at the beginning of the very next scene, he's already thoroughly convinced of the opposite. I guess he was more or less in denial because Will Smith did a pretty interesting job convincing him. He's like, "I know you're a clone of me. Do you ever feel lonely? Well, me too." He started listing off a bunch of specific traits and scenarios that he was certain both of them would share. Like, you've had some really bad experiences with trusting people in your life and stuff like that, but everything he listed seemed to do a lot more with nurture than nature. What if this guy was just raised differently than you? I'm still not really sure how the whole cloning thing works, because at one point, the younger Will Smith says that he remembers being raised by Clive Owen, I think? Even if those memories were planted, wouldn't that be an entirely different experience than you had growing up? It would probably be a safer bet to convince him he's your clone by listing off some sort of physical abnormality or something. Like, yo, I know you can ear rumble, how about that? Every time you step outside and look at the sun after being inside for a while, you sneeze because you have autosomal compatibility self-propelling helio-ophthalmic outburst syndrome. I know you're me because your penis hangs to the left. How about that? I mean, they are both extremely allergic to bee venom, seeing as how they mentioned that 3 times in the film. Maybe he actually did mention that when he was trying to convince him he's a clone. I don't remember. They mentioned it so many times that they kind of just all blended together. Every so often, Will Smith is like, hey guys, remember, I'm allergic to bee venom. From the first time it happens, it's excruciatingly obvious that it's going to come into play again later. And wouldn't you know it, Will Smith gets shot by a tranquilizer dart and Mary Elizabeth Winstead's like, what was that? What was in it? And the other Will Smith nonchalantly says, bee venom. It was so funny. Also, despite how long they spent setting it up, it didn't even matter anyway. They were like, yo, I've got the epinephrine something right here. You're fine, don't worry about it. The bee venom didn't really matter at all. I'm honestly not even sure why Will Smith was cloned at all. At one point he's like, why would you clone me when you could just clone some other people? And they're like, you're the only person who's cool enough that you can shoot someone on a train while it's moving and get a good shot because you're a good shot and nobody else has these reflexes. So they needed Will Smith to kill Will Smith because nobody else could kill Will Smith because Will Smith's the best at killing. I don't know, you'd think that if they had the technology to clone people, then they would already be pretty good at manipulating DNA. Instead of making a genetic clone, you could probably just make a superhuman or something, right? Again, this movie had plenty of time to communicate things properly, but it felt as though so much was left out. The movie's 2 hours long, and about an hour and a half in, it felt like the end of the first act. There was a 3-act structure, but there was no second act. Things got set up, and then there was an action scene, and then it was over. It was poorly structured, to say the least. I guess I'm gonna get into spoiler territory. I know I've already revealed a bit, but I mean, it wasn't really much of a spoiler to know that the bee thing was gonna come back into play. I'm sure everybody would have assumed that anyway, but I guess here's a spoiler warning. If you don't want to hear spoilers, click to this part in the video. 3, 2, 1. So in the climax of the movie, they face off against a guy who's wearing the mask from Death Race 2. He looks really out of place and silly, but he knows a bunch of ninja flips or something. And then as they defeat him, they take off his mask and bam, it's another Will Smith. It was really funny. I'm still really confused about how the whole cloning thing works, because if Clive Owen was raising second Will Smith this entire time since he was a boy, then does that mean he was also raising third Will Smith on the side? Anyway, the movie ends with second Will Smith going to college. Like he was trained to be an assassin his whole life, and now he's just gonna pick up a bachelor's degree or something. This was the first part of the movie where you could actually see younger Will Smith in the daylight, and yeah, it wasn't as convincing. Anyway, I found this movie to be pretty funny. It was kind of boring at points, but whatever, I got what I wanted to out of it. It's really difficult to take Will Smith seriously at this point. No matter what he does, he just feels like Will Smith. At no point did I feel like he was Henry Brogan. It was just Will Smith versus younger Will Smith. Either way, at least I'm able to get some enjoyment out of the films he's in. It might not be the type of enjoyment he intends, but I'm happy nonetheless. Anyway, check this one out if you like watching things that are bad. And I'm giving this one a 2 out of 10.